Now, to understand the scale of the business, that's transpired over the last 40 years or so, at that point of time in 1990, you had around 10 brands under the LVMH umbrella. Sales were around 2-3 billion or so. Today, LVMH has around 75 brands. And the kicker is that almost 30 out of those brands are almost 100 years old, more than 100 years old.
Wow.
Now, and the expanse covers variety of products. So they have 5 divisions. You have fashion and leather, you have wines and spirits, you have watches and jewelry, you have perfumes and cosmetics, and you have selective retailing. So huge empire that it built.
Welcome to Coffee and Investing with Saurabh. Today we'll drill down into a luxury goods company which has changed the essence, changed the strategies of all luxury goods companies in the world. It's a game-changing company. It's run by a Frenchman, but a very unusual Frenchman. He's a Frenchman with American zeal. His name is Bernard Arnault. The name of the company is LVMH. I'll try to pronounce it in the French way. My French is not the best. Louis Vuitton, Moet, Hennessy. Right? To discuss LVMH, we have with us our global consumer analyst, Prashant Mittal. Prashant, you joined us for Hermes.
Correct,
So welcome
yes.
back to discuss the other luxury titan, LVMH. Great to have you here.
Glad to be
So
here.
Prashant, I have to be honest here. In my middle class lifestyle, LV मेरे पास नहीं है, right? LV I can only see जब मैं airport में जाता हूँ. I see other people carrying the LV.
Yeah.
But I have also contributed to LVMH's colossal success. उनका जो 250 बिलियन यूरो का मार्केट कैप है,
Correct.
the 250 बिलियन यूरो मार्केट कैप, माय कंट्रीब्यूशन इज मैंने जिंदगी में एक बार मोए हेनेसी की शैंपेन पी है.
Oh, wow.
अ फ्रेंड ऑफ माइन बॉट इट एट ड्यूटी फ्री एट मुंबई एयरपोर्ट, तो मुझे भी थोड़ा सा मिला. तो मेरे कंट्रीब्यूशन नॉट विथ स्टैंडिंग, could you give us a sense of the vastness of Bernard Arnault's empire?
Sure. So let's start with just basic numbers.
बड़े-बड़े आंकड़े
set the
क्या हैं?
context. So as you mentioned, the company has a market cap of 250 billion
बिल्कुल.
euros. The sales in the most recent year, 2024, were around 85 billion euros. Profits were around 13 billion or so. Revenues have grown by around 11-12% over the last 10 years, while profits have grown around 13-14%.
13-14% यूरो प्रॉफिट्स कंपाउंडिंग,
Euro.
राइट? तो मतलब अगर रुपीज में होती तो 17-18%
Yes.
प्रॉफिट कंपाउंडिंग है एट दिस कोलोसल स्केल.
At the colossal scale.
अमेजिंग यार.
The colossal scale. And it reflects in the returns also in some ways, right? So the company was, in its current avatar, was founded in 1987. That's when it listed. The earliest numbers we get are from 1989. So if you were to take those numbers, the returns generated over this period are around 65x for the company.
राइट.
Now you compare, this is France listed company. So you compare that with the French index, CAC 40.
वी फ्रेंच नहीं करते, S&P के मुकाबले.
Let's do S&P, that's 33x, so half of that, right? Even over the last 10 years,
हाँ जी.
the company has given around 500% returns, while S&P has done half of that, so
Bloody.
240%.
So it's very American. That's a, it's a इंसान American, almost American है. Bernard Arnault French है. I'm sure he's proud to be French. But उसकी जो सोच है, his mindset, the way he's built his empire is very American, which is why I said let's compare with S&P. But आप बोल रहे हो, even compared to the S&P's compounding over 10 years or 40 years,
Yeah.
LVMH has done twice as well,
Twice as
right?
well.
Twice as well. अब जाते हैं why? What are the basics of this company? What are the fundamentals which are allowed LVMH to become this incredible titan?
So let's start with the genesis of the company, right? I mean, you covered the key part, of his genesis quite well in the introduction, that Bernard changed the very essence of how people looked at luxury, right? It used to be the domain of niche houses.
बिल्कुल छोटी
right?
चीज, छोटी
Boutique
boutique
houses होते थे. We know how Hermes started,
हाँ
right? In a stable, making those saddles,
Horse के लिए,
etc.
हाँ.
So LVMH was formed through a merger of its parent companies, Louis Vuitton
Okay.
and Moet Hennessy.
अच्छा.
Right? These two individually are heritage brands. So Louis Vuitton actually was started in 1854,
Wow.
while again Moet and Hennessy are separate brands, which were formed through a merger in 1971. Individually, these two were formed in the 18th century, around 1715 or so. So the combination of these two happened around 1987. Now, interestingly, it wasn't Bernard Arnault who actually executed the merger. He was actually brought in to ward off corporate takeovers But what ended up happening, ironically, was in his classic corporate takeover style, he started taking over control of the company from 1987 to 1990.
Okay.
That's when the ownership went to Arnault. Now, to understand the scale of the business, that's transpired over the last 40 years or so, at that point of time in 1990, you had around 10 brands under the LVMH umbrella. Sales were around 2-3 billion or so. Today, LVMH has around 75 brands. And the kicker is that almost 30 out of those brands are almost 100 years old, more than 100 years old.
Wow.
Now, and the expanse covers variety of products. So they have 5 divisions. You have fashion and leather, you have wines and spirits, you have watches and jewelry, you have perfumes and cosmetics, and you have selective retailing. They have a small hospitality exposure as well, but that's minimal. So even geographically, they've expanded outside of Europe to almost 80 plus countries now. So huge empire that it built.
So interesting, right? तो आप बोल रहे हो the LV brand was started in 1854. 1854. तो सोचिए तब हम we were dealing with the first war of independence, जो अंग्रेज ग्रेट म्यूटिनी बोलते हैं. सो मंगल पांडे जी लड़ाई कर रहे थे, युद्ध कर रहे थे. वहाँ पे फ्रांस में लग्जरी ब्रांड्स बन रही थी.
Hermes was around the same time, right? 1837.
So आज हम global compounders में, so folks, full disclosure, in our global compounders portfolio, we are invested in these brands, Hermes and LVMH. So हम invested है, हमारी families invested है, clients invested है, and that's allowed us to drive compounding on the back of this. So 75 brands, 75 brands. By the way, one of my friends is a CTO, Chief Technology Officer for one of the brands, and he says each brand is allowed to operate full independently, right? तो थोड़ा सा बताएंगे beyond this plentitude of brands, right? What has been the growth driver for this company?
So I would say acquisitions or inorganic growth has been a core driver.
हाँ जी.
The 75 brands that we are talking about, majority of them have been acquired by LVMH over a period of time. That being said, it would be incorrect to think that that's the sole driver.
अच्छा जी.
What Arnault essentially does is he acquires a brand, mostly the brands which are facing some sort of financial distress or a company which is facing a succession issue.
Right.
That's when he acquires a brand. And what he does very well is he scales them up. So it's a classic case of scale begets scale. So I'll give you an example. We talked about Louis Vuitton as a brand, right? So in 1990, this brand had around 120 odd stores, 125 odd stores, while the sales were around $1 billion. Today, this brand has around 450 odd stores around the world. And a conservative estimate, because they don't break out the sales of Louis Vuitton separately, but our own estimate suggests conservatively it would be around 20 billion easily.
Achha.
Right. So from $1 billion to 20 billion, they have scaled up this brand. We are seeing similar sort of things happen for their recent acquisitions, like a Bulgari brand they acquired in 2011, which is again being scaled up. So the core of Bernard's execution, in theory, it's quite simple, right? That you acquire brands and you scale them up.
But
in practice,
other people are not able to do this, right?
Yes. So so their sales are more than 4 times those of other luxury conglomerates. So the other ones are Kering and Richemont. So Kering is the one that owns Gucci brand. Richemont is the one that owns the Cartier brand. So LVMH sales are more than 4x. Now this allows Arnault to actually get the best of the real estate locations.
Okay.
First and foremost. But that doesn't just stop there. These advantages continue in advertising and marketing, in terms of getting the right talent, executive as well as creative, as well as the raw materials. So he uses these, the higher scale very, very well to scale up his brands. To give you some numbers, about a quarter of their cash from operations goes towards acquisitions. But almost a third, 33% goes into organic capex. This is the scale up part.
So it's very interesting, right? हमको सिखाया जाता है from the day we become analysts that 70-80% of acquisitions fail.
Yeah.
Right? वो US में हो, France में हो या India में हो, 70-80% of M&A fails, folks. In that context, Bernard Arnault is remarkable.
Yeah.
He seems to be able to make most of his acquisitions work.
Definitely.
Right?
To varying successes, but definitely.
So आप talent की बात कर रहे थे, जो मेरा दोस्त काम करता है, right? As CTO. So he was the CTO of one of India's largest FMCG companies, right? मेरे घर के पास ही रहता था, नॉर्थ बॉम्बे में. एंड आई स्टिल रिमेंबर राइट 7-8 साल पहले इसको CTO बनने का अपॉर्चुनिटी मिला वो वन ऑफ द 75 brands राइट एंड वी हैड अ थिंक वी हैड अ 5-minute chat and both of us knew it was a no brainer and he left India unfortunately for me to run this take the CTO role and hasn't looked back ever since right this ability to pull prime talent
Oh yeah.
into key roles. So वो अर्नु आइडेंटिफाई कर रहा है बोल रहे हो कौन सी ब्रांड डिस्ट्रेस में है या सक्सेशन इशू है he acquires it pumps in high quality talent I presume pumps in capital
Yeah.
and then scales up and this is a recipe that nobody else has been able to replicate at this scale in the luxury industry.
Not at all.
Remarkable. अच्छा अब आते हैं out of those 75 brands what are the key brands which are allowing us to compound as shareholders?
So let's just look at what each brand or each division sort of contributes to the economics of the brand. So the most important division is definitely the fashion and leather
What they're known
part
for,
of the
right?
business, within which Louis Vuitton is the bellwether of the brand. So fashion and leather as a whole contributes around half of LVMH sales,
ठीक है.
but around 75% of the operating profits.
Okay, wow. So those bags that we see at the airport
Yes.
are 75% of their profits.
Yes.
Wow, okay.
So this is the highest margin segment of the business. So 75% of operating profits, and Louis Vuitton individually as the brand, again they don't break it out, but our estimates and channel checks sort of suggest that that alone contributes around 45 to 50% of operating profits.
Okay.
So Louis Vuitton as a brand individually. Apart from that, within this division, you have brands like Christian Dior. Now, this one is a little different in the sense that it's into something called haute couture. I hope I got the pronunciation right.
You
My
get a
French
high
isn't
fashion
very
होता है क्या?
high fashion. So it literally means high swing or high dressmaking.
अच्छा.
So these are customized dresses
अच्छा जी.
which are made by the designer boutiques.
This is not the kind of stuff we buy online. Customized कपड़े for.
These are customized dresses.
Wow,
Yes.
okay. ठीक है.
So you have Louis Vuitton, you have Christian Dior, and then you have smaller brands like Fendi and Loro Piana. Then you have the wines and spirits division. So this is the Moet Hennessy part of the
हाँ,
business.
यहाँ पे मैंने दिया है.
So within this, you have obviously Moet and Chandon, the champagne. Then you have the Hennessy cognac. More recently, they have also delved into the spirits part. So the Glenmorangie Scotch is under their umbrella. Belvedere Vodka is under their umbrella. Dom Perignon, the legendary brand, is again under LVMH umbrella. Then you have watches and jewelry, the third division. Now this division has got Arnault's increasing interest in the recent past, over the last 10-15 years, especially with the acquisition of Bulgari in 2011. And more recently, the acquisition of Tiffany. This was during the COVID era, 2020, 2021. So you have Bulgari and Tiffany in the jewelry division. You have watches like Tag Heuer and Hublot in the watches part. This contributes somewhere around 8% of operating profits. Lastly, you have perfumes and cosmetics and selective retail, which combined contribute around 10% of operating profits. Here you have brands like Dior, Givenchy, and the iconic selective retail Sephora.
कुछ क्या इस इंसान के पास ऐसा कुछ है क्या इन लग्जरी जो इंसान के पास नहीं है?
Certainly feels so, right? ऐसा लगता है कि कुछ बचा नहीं है.
Avengers ने सुपर हीरोज के साथ जो किया है इन लोगों ने लग्जरी के साथ किया है. But seriously कुछ है क्या जो that he hasn't been able to get?
There are a couple of brands he's not been able to get his hands on, right? First one is obviously Hermes. We discussed in the last podcast.
He must be itching to get his hands on Hermes watch.
Now it's very difficult given the structure Hermes has made. But he did try so, right? Post GFC till mid 2010s. But even Gucci, he has his sights on Gucci also in late 90s. So they were able to ward off the attack and go into Kering. So Kering has Gucci. You have Hermes, which is a standalone. But even the likes of Cartier, they are with Richemont. So कुछ brands हैं अभी भी which are not part of.
So Prashant कभी मेरे को याद दिलाना we need to do a separate podcast is why is it that the French and the Italians are able to nail luxury? दुनिया में कोई दूसरा देश नहीं कर पाता. US के लोग नहीं कर पाते. Luxury and American कैसे आप मिलता नहीं है. Ditto the Japanese and the Chinese are not able to nail luxury. तो कभी दिमाग लगाना है कि why is it that these two Mediterranean countries, France and Italy, are so preeminent
And they've been able to commercialize and
over a
scale.
course of 150 साल,
Oh yeah.
150 साल पे इन्होंने अटर डोमिनेंस दिखाई है.
Utter
क्यों ऐसा है
dominance.
कि ये वाली जो मेडिटेरेनियन जाति है ये लोग डोमिनेट कर गए हैं.
Absolutely.
चलो आगे बढ़ते हैं. जोग्राफिकली क्या क्या रेवेन्यू स्प्लिट होते हैं?
So the Americas and Europe contribute around a quarter of sales each. The contribution of Asia ex Japan, that's mostly China, is around 28% or so. Japan would be around 10% or so. And the remaining 12-13% would be rest of the world, mostly Latin America and Middle East.
So interesting. अगर हम Japan, if we take Japan as part of Asia,
Yeah.
if we take Japan as part of Asia, then Asia becomes
Almost 40%.
40%, right?
Almost 40%.
So we should be proud of that. कि LVMH की majority sales Asian लोगों के पैसे से आ रही है. But competition पे आते हैं किसके साथ टक्कर? I know it might sound stupid to some people to ask this because it sounds like a leviathan.
Oh, yeah.
But टक्कर किसके साथ है?
So as you mentioned, right, I mean, a plethora of divisions, a plethora of brands. So it competes across a plethora of companies as well. So let's look at it division by division, right? So in fashion and leather, at the highest end, they compete with the likes of Hermes and Chanel. At a more moderate end, they compete with the likes of Gucci and Prada.
अच्छा.
For wines and spirits, their competition would be mainly with Pernod Ricard, Remy Cointreau, and Diageo. For watches and jewelry, the primary competition is Richemont, the jewelry luxury conglomerate. It has Cartier, Van Cleef, brands like these. But it also competes with Chanel, Swatch Group, and even independent, boutique houses, Swiss houses like Chopard.
Right.
In perfumes and cosmetics, Chanel is again a competitor. Chanel is big in fragrances. But then you have these mass market sort of brands like L'Oreal and Estee Lauder as well. And in selective retail, which is essentially Sephora, within US they compete with the likes of Ulta Beauty. But increasingly they are facing competition from retailers like Walmart and Amazon as well.
Okay, so it might feel like because it's such a big company, competition नहीं है, but आप बोल रहे हो in the separate verticals.
Each division, and that's why it's important to have a separate team and P&L. They compete individually with different sort of brands. And hence my point on the scale, right? How they use
Actually,
it.
अब याद आया मेरे को. So I've had Hennessy का cognac. So होता क्या है कि when you ask for hot toddy, in restaurants in Mumbai or in India, तो उसमें cognac होता है. So they usually say Hennessy डालेंगे तो 1400-1500 रुपए का झटका है. So I then ask them सस्ता cognac है क्या कोई जो आपको इतना खर्चा ना हो, and I won't name the सस्ता cognac brand. वो मुझे 900 रुपए में मिल जाता है, right? So there is competition, and for people like me who have modest means, it means that we don't always buy LVMH, but because often there's a slightly cheaper provider at a lower price point. But let's come back to the core thrust of this compounding machine, right? आपने बोला 17-18% rupees terms में 17-18% profit compounding, euros में 14-15% profit compounding over the last several decades. What are the competitive advantages, Prashant, which has driven this sort of powerhouse compounding?
So Saurabh, I think if you were to talk about the primary competitive advantage, it would be scale of the business. I know it sounds a little weird because yeah, I mean, we tend to associate scale with more commodity sort of industries, right? But as I mentioned earlier, right, the company has used its scale to absolutely squeeze out the competition, right? I mean, if you're generating 5x cash from operation versus your peers like Kering and Richemont, you squeeze out the best, most iconic locations.
Okay, so you're saying just the amount of cash flow is 5x compared
5x.
To this
the Kering and Richemont, which are not small, by the way. They are $15-20 billion sale businesses.
दूसरे level पे खेल रहे हैं.
दूसरे level पे, right? Best real estate locations, and again, it doesn't stop there. He gets the best shelf spaces. He gets the best marketing. LVMH this year announced its official partnership with F1, Formula One, right? So that again gives it huge visibility. But again, very, very high positioning. I don't know if you recall, there was this iconic Dior fashion show at Gateway of India in 2023.
यार मुझे बुलाया नहीं उन्होंने यार. Go.
But to pull off something like that, in a city like Bombay, is absolutely iconic. Right. So they do these things really well. And obviously then we talked about getting the right talent, being able to pay them really well, getting the raw materials which might be in, limited sort of supply. But I would like to actually, sort of add a caveat here because we had discussed Hermes in our previous chat that how we look at these two firms, in terms of competitive advantages. So Hermes is best of the lot, period.
Acha.
I mean, in terms of the competitive
They are
advantages.
the Don Bradman. They are the,
Absolutely. I mean, and by a margin. I mean, the obsession they have with craftsmanship and quality is unparalleled, right? Their competitive advantage is absolutely unparalleled. And that shows up in the kind of resilience.
पहले
we
तो
see.
आपने जो कहानी बोली ना कि हर्मेस आम इंसान को प्राप्त नहीं है, आई हैव चेक्ड इट विद हंड्रेड्स ऑफ क्लाइंट्स, राइट, एंड सब ने ये बोला है कि हर्मेस बहुत ही गिने चुने लोगों को बर्किन बैग और केली बैग मिलता है,
Absolutely. You have to be in the wait list. I mean, they vet you.
और जिसको वो बर्किन बैग और केली बैग मिल गई जिस लेडी को, उसकी जिंदगी पूरी दूसरे लेवल पे चली जाती है.
I mean, if nothing else, it works as a great investment. So, yeah, coming to, so I said Hermes is best of the lot. With regards to LVMH, we believe is the best of the rest for the reasons that I mentioned, right?
To be fair, I mean, the comparison, whilst they both are luxury, Hermes is ultra luxury.
Absolutely.
They have not pursued scale per se.
No.
They have pursued being the choicest luxury brand.
I mean, think about it. Hermes has reduced the store count. That was one of the key points.
Whereas
right?
LVMH की strategy दूसरी रही है.
Yes.
They focused on mass affluent.
Yes.
Effectively, they focused on our strata of society and our clientele and said इनको कैसे महंगी चीजें बेचे. So the strategies are very different.
Correct.
And it's fascinating that market caps are pretty similar. Euro 250 billion for both.
Yeah.
दोनों 250 billion euro के आसपास है. Even though the one has said ultra luxury, Hermes, deep specialization, and other one LVMH has said mass affluent और 75 brand, right? तो बहुत ही दिलचस्प corporate case study है कि अलग-अलग strategies in the same industry, both converging on broadly the same result, 250 billion euro की
I mean,
market
they
cap.
both do, and they're both very clear about how they want to reach to the level they want to reach to. And that's why I honestly do think that apart from scale, having a founder like Bernard is also a soft competitive advantage. And I mean, we've discussed the drive of the man who actually started this idea of luxury conglomerate, bringing the brands together, heritage brands together, and sort of getting the common costs out and using scale to sort of getting the economies of scale through that. Very well connected, very charming. And one thing that probably people don't realize is that he doesn't have a private equity sort of a mindset when it comes to acquiring brands. He is not looking to sweat out those brands and generate a profit quickly. He gives them time, he nurtures them. And this is an important point when you consider a business or a founder who's looking to sell his business. It's his baby. He wants it to go to someone who is going to equally care about
The
it.
Berkshire Hathaway वाली story है.
Correct.
People go to Warren Buffett and
Yes.
say मेरी company ले लीजिए.
Yes. So that gives him an edge. Even if you forget about the price he's willing to pay, that he's going to nurture my brand, care about my brand.
So I've heard that Tiffany's, right? Tiffany's तो New York में famous store है.
Yeah.
Breakfast at Tiffany's, the famous Audrey Hepburn movie. So Tiffany's was acquired by
Yes.
LVMH, right?
Yes,
And
2020.
spectacular turnaround है कुछ.
It's in the process.
अच्छा.
It's in the process. He's doing all the right things.
2020 में COVID के दौरान Tiffany's
के दौरान.
and rebuilt it, refurbished it,
Yeah.
and relaunch हुआ I guess.
Relaunch हो गया है. They changed the entire communication around the brand. One of Arnault's kid, Alexander Arnault, was actually put in charge of that.
Right.
So he's got his eyes set on how to use, because that's been a missing piece. If you look at his entire journey,
हाँ जी.
till the time he acquired Bulgari in 2011, jewelry wasn't a big part of his empire. It was
Right.
mostly leather goods
Right.
and wines and spirits. With Bulgari and now Tiffany, they've entered into this jewelry space as well. And he is quite
Hopefully हमारे
focused on
इंडिया
that.
में जो इन्वेस्टमेंट है टाइटन, होपफुली टाइटन वाले भी they'll take a leaf out of LVMH's book and become a house of brands. But coming back, what keeps you up at night about LVMH?
So I think there are two things. More near term is something that I think keeps a lot of people awake, which is the exposure to China, right? So as I mentioned, Asia ex Japan, which again is mostly China, revenue exposure is around 28% or so. The interesting thing though is that fashion and leather division, the most profitable division, is actually more indexed to China as compared to the entire company. So fashion and leather has around 36% exposure to Asia ex Japan,
Right, okay.
versus 28% for the entire company.
Okay.
Right. You combine that with the fact that fashion and leather is also the highest profit margin
Hence,
division.
Asia is a particular
A further sort of a slowdown in China may lead to some sort of softness in the operating profit growth
Okay.
as well.
So first risk is extended Chinese slowdown.
Extended Chinese slowdown that
And
has affected.
you're saying that the good folks in Bombay, Bangalore, Delhi can't make up for that?
Not China
Arey
scale,
yaar.
not China scale. I mean, it's huge. It's huge. Think about it, right? 85 billion sales,
हाँ जी.
30% of that. I mean, that's huge,
Right.
right?
चलो कभी भी
So-
हमारा देश भी पहुंचेगा. चलो अगला next source
So
of stress.
that's more near-term risk. Longer-term risk, which is very widely sort of appreciated by the wider street, is what happens in the post-Arnault LVMH world.
Succession planning.
Succession planning.
आपने बोला ये अलेक्जेंडर आर्नोल्ट को टिफनी चलाने भेजा है.
Yeah, so, and before I get to that, I mean, he has no plans of retiring, by the way. He's 76 years old. But you know people like this, Warren Buffett and the Charlie Mungers, right? They are very, very...
Mid 90s तक तो खींच ही लेना.
Exactly, right? And you've seen the evidence. LVMH board actually increased the CEO age limit to 85 in April this year. So he has given himself 9 years. Right, but that said, it's a game of probabilities. So the street would like to understand who is the heir apparent. The general idea is it's a fight between two of Arnault's kids. There are a total of 5. It's between two of them. Delphine is the elder one.
अच्छा जी.
Now she heads the Christian Dior, the haute couture division that we talked
Right.
about. My bet is on Alexander Arnault. This guy is in early 30s. And the reason why I would put my bet on this guy is because he's been moved around to the business, to get a...
To groom him.
Yeah, so he started his journey with a small German brand called Rimowa. So this is a...
वो suitcase बनाते हैं स्टील वाली.
Correct. Luxury,
steel,
luggage maker. He actually was the one who actually got the company to sell itself to LVMH. And the story goes that the founder said that only if you become the CEO of Rimowa am I going to sell it.
अच्छा.
So that shows you the drive of the man.
Right.
Post that he went to, head the turnaround of Tiffany.
Right.
And more recently he's been made the deputy CEO of the Moet Hennessy brand.
अच्छा, okay.
So he's been moved around.
So your
he's been
hunch is
groomed.
इसकी तैयारी की जा रही है. He's being groomed for the big job.
It seems so. It certainly
और
seems
डेल्फिन
so.
को इस प्रकार का roving mandate नहीं
No,
मिला
I
है.
think hopefully she pardons me for saying this, but she seems to be quite happy in Christian Dior right now.
शायद मैं भी हैप्पी होता यार अगर क्रिश्चियन डियोर चलाने को देते. Anything else beyond succession planning? What else worries you?
I think these two would be my major
ये
worries.
टैरिफ जो ट्रम्प जी के टैरिफ है इससे अब सब चिंता
So
नहीं हो
Saurabh,
रही.
I think you're very well aware how fuzzy and how noisy the picture is right now, right? I mean, every week the story changes. But just to give you an idea of how we are thinking about it internally, Americas contribute close to around 20% of the operating profits. Right. Now, that being said, America's revenue are mostly concentrated in two divisions. So you have fashion and leather and you have selective retailing. Combined, they form around 70% of revenues that come from Americas. So let's look at them one by one. Fashion and leather, as we mentioned, has the highest margin. They do have pricing power. Right. So some bit of tariff increase
So
can be
10-20% से कुछ
they can
ना-
pass it.
हाँ,
I mean, it's a 70% gross margin business,
हाँ जी,
right?
हाँ.
So 20-30% में आप बढ़ाओगे तो
Presumably
कितना
the
पड़ेगा?
strata of society which buy these goods is
Right.
not going to say हम Chinese सामान खरीदेंगे just because tariff आ गई.
Exactly. So some bit of it can be passed through. The other thing that sort of helps offset some pressure is that out of around 29 leather workshops that the company has, 4 of them are in US.
अच्छा ठीक
So
है.
that reduces the need to import
They
some
can
of
do
the
MAGA.
stuff.
They can do MAGA if need
They
be.
can do MAGA,
हाँ जी.
right? So one of them is in Texas itself. The selective retail, which is Sephora, and Sephora, by the way, is really successful in US.
Okay.
They
yeah.
sit at right at the top in terms of positioning when you talk about
Achha.
beauty and fragrance retail in US.
And Sephora, just to be clear, these are standalone stores.
Yeah.
Standalone stores in malls
Yeah.
जहाँ पे high-end beauty products मिलते हैं.
Yes. Beauty, fragrances,
Right.
anything related to
ठीक है?
lifestyle.
हाँ
as
तो
such.
Sephora का जिक्र कर रहे थे आप.
So they are positioned right at the highest end, right? So a lot of brands sort of buy them, for a shelf space, etc. So that allows you to sort of, in a way, distribute the pricing pressure across brands, right? And the remaining can be passed through, just like in the case of fashion and leather, because the clientele that comes to Sephora comes there knowing that we are going at the highest end. Some bit of it can be passed through. So long story short, as long as the tariffs are reasonable and not too extreme, it wouldn't be a problem. And frankly, we're not losing our sleep over this.
That being said, right, I mean, for those who are listening, one word of caution, Prashant, you mentioned that China is a
Yeah.
disproportionately punchy driver. मेरा दोस्त जो वहाँ पे काम करता है ना CTO वन ऑफ द ब्रांड्स के लिए, वो 40% टाइम चाइना में रहता है.
Yeah.
He's not, his home is somewhere else, but because China is such a big market for these folks, he spends a lot of time. So if the Chinese economy keeps getting pounded by Trump G, then I presume there will be a
So that's where the margin of comfort we get from valuations becomes really important. And again, drawing a comparison to Hermes, right? Because we hold both these stocks. Hermes, so 2024 was actually a very good sort of a trailer of how this entire luxury ladder sort of performs. Hermes did, double-digit sort of sales growth in 2024 at one end. Then you had some people like Kering at the other end, which are absolutely decimated. Gucci's revenues declined by 20%, more
जो
than
मास एफ पे
20%.
है, मास एफ की पिटाई, मास एफ्लुएंट की
Yes.
पिटाई हो गई.
LVMH, as you mentioned, is best of the rest, but even that has seen a decline, and that has led to decline in the stock prices, and the gap between Hermes and LVMH has widened quite a bit. So while Hermes remains a core part of a portfolio, given the gap that has widened and the valuation is gone down.
Because सस्ती हो गई है, हमने ले लिया है. अच्छा बात है, this is a company that you and I can discuss endlessly, right? So much to learn from Bernard Arnault and what he's done in the last 40 years. But somebody who's listening to this podcast, अगर और उनको पढ़ना हो, सीखना हो LVMH के बारे में, what are the resources you can point them towards?
So I think the couple of books that I mentioned in our last discussion.
In the Hermes वाला podcast, हाँ जी.
Yeah. So Luxury Strategy by Cafferer and Bastian.
हाँ जी.
And Deluxe by Dana Thomas. They
These are
remain
the classics to
relevant.
read on luxury. ठीक
But
है.
if someone wants to read on Bernard Arnault, especially the pre-LVMH era, A Taste of Luxury by Forestier and Ravai would be an excellent read.
Taste of Luxury is a book on Arnault.
Yes.
Whereas Abolo Luxury Strategy and Deluxe are books on the luxury industry.
Luxury ecosystem and how things work.
And folks, I would strongly recommend you towards these resources because मेरे ख्याल से India में the polarization of wealth that we are seeing in India will continue. India will become a big luxury market, leaving aside how much money we'll make from Hermes and LVMH. If you are thinking of building a business around that, I'll strongly recommend that you turn to the books that Prashant has recommended. But thank you, Prashant. This was a lot of fun. And thank you for helping us invest in LVMH and Hermes and for helping us make money for our clients. And we hope to have you back on Coffee and Investing.
Pleasure to be here, Saurabh.
Thank you.
Thank you.